Welcome to the Rob Miteri podcast. This month's theme is Finding Our Healing, tribute to National Wellness Month. Healing can mean different things for different people. You could be in a toxic relationship that versus and you're starting a healthy one, or it could just mean choosing healthier habits. Healthier habits are not always just physical, but also the people you choose to be around, how you look at health, and how you go about it. And are you allowed to get better? I ask that a lot of times to my clients when I work in the mental health field, and sometimes the question sometimes stuns people. So are we allowed to get better? It's today we're attributed to National Wellness Month. I have a new guest. His name is Chet. Chet Chet
Galaska. It's just
Galaska.
Alaska with a G in front of it, Robert.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight. As we continue to just talk about when we start this journey on this idea of finding our healing and tribute to National Wellness Month.
Sure. Well, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
No problem. I just want to share real quick two things. 988 in the United States is the crisis lifeline if you are in crisis, but also I want, in addition, just because it's National Wellness Month, if you are listening, you're watching, you're feeling unwell, I encourage you to find a professional to assist you. That means whether it's a free clinic or your primary care doctor you're avoiding, I encourage you to get seen, get screened, and just be, a lot of times putting a priority to our health can be sometimes the best thing we can do. There's something I want to, I always say people say better than I do, Chet, and they usually do. There's one thing there's one quote kind of stuck to me. It says, so many people spend their health gaining wealth and then have to spend their wealth regaining their health. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to it. The only real problem is that very often when you lose your health, there's no getting it back.
Yeah.
So you squander it and then it's gone. And the best you can do is maintain it at that point. But you're right. Yeah. The struggle for wealth it's hard. There's a lot of stress involved. Mm-hmm. That usually translates into health issues. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's important to take care of yourself early on rather than figure I'll get my health back later. You probably won't.
Yeah, and it's the consistency. That's one thing that I feel like, we may have these big lofty plans after New Year's, but we don't really hold on to it. It's just the everyday, the choices we make every day. I want to ask you, you're new when it comes to, National Wellness Month, but also what has helped you, I guess, take the steps towards healing. And we're going to get to know a little bit more about, we're going to have a portion to share a little bit about your story, but what has helped you take the first steps, at least as we continue talking about this?
Well, I never had a bad lifestyle to begin with, Robert. So for me, it wasn't really a struggle. It wasn't like turning things around. I'm lucky enough to be married to a woman that I love who's also a great cook. So I've been eating well for a long time. I have always worked out. I've belonged to the YMCA for a long time, and I get down there all the time. And I've been doing that for probably 50 years or so anyway. So between the exercise and the healthy eating, I've had a pretty good run. Right now, I'm almost about to turn 73, August 6th. I've had diabetes for 43 years, and I'm still doing fine with it. And the exercise and the diet are two big keys to the reason that is.
And when you mentioned diabetes, I know your story is a lot about that. I want to ask you, what helped you? I guess obviously you say you've been working out, you have good food, but what is there anything that helped you kind of? Because when I hear people talk about diabetes, they get stuck. They're like, "Oh my goodness, I don't, I'm that ruins." Well, what has helped you kind of acclimate and just live life even with having diabetes well? What steps has helped you in that way?
Well, you just have to understand what you've got, and that it's going to be a hard thing to control. But if you're going to live long and healthy, you've got to do certain things to take care of it. So I guess I'm fortunate in another way in that I don't really freak out really easily. I was able to take the diabetes diagnosis in stride.
Mm-hmm.
And I just decided that I've got to learn what to do, and then I've got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The moment I was prescribed insulin, I told myself, well, here you go. You're going to take at least one injection a day for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out to be generally a lot more than one a day, but I have never missed a day in all those years. So you really just need a can-do mental attitude where you buckle down and say, this is what it is. I have to deal with it. And over the years, I've met a number of people who have not dealt with it, and they have suffered some terrible consequences, Robert. You know, they've died because of it. It's a very easy disease to ignore, but you can only ignore it for so long, and then it will be a fatal disease.
Yeah, and that brings up like when it comes to national wellness, a lot of times the notable ones that we think about, especially when it comes to diseases like cancer or something that people are familiar with. But when we think about diabetes, like you said, it's treatable. It's something that you can work through, you could live through, you could change your diet, you can do what's necessary. But I guess the problem really stems from avoiding it. I kind of said in the beginning, encouraging those who are listening, if you're feeling, unwell, fatigued or whatever, to find help, get a professional screen you. But anything else you want to share or say about that?
Actually, what you brought up is really a big point. People think that you can prevent diabetes or you can avoid it. And unfortunately, the underlying conditions that cause diabetes are caused by genetics and environmental triggers. You can't do anything about your genetics, and we don't know enough about the triggers to know what to avoid. They may be different for different people. So once you have that genetic makeup and the underlying cause gets triggered, you are on the road to diabetes. The question at that point is, what do you do to keep your blood glucose levels from rising too high? And that's where diet and exercise come in, and medication also, for that matter. So you can't go back and cure the underlying causes. Unfortunately, there is no cure for those things, so you're stuck with them. The question is just, how well can you manage your blood sugars? If you,
sorry, go ahead.
There's an advertising campaign out right now about diabetes prevention, and they use that word, but you have to understand how the vocabulary of diabetes is utilized. When they say cure diabetes, they don't mean curing insulin resistance, which is the underlying cause that will not go away. The term diabetes simply refers to a level of blood glucose. So if you have prediabetes, you've got a blood glucose level that's higher than normal, but not high enough to be classified as diabetes. If it gets higher, it can be classified as diabetes, but it just means that your average blood sugars are running higher. They're not different diseases. They're just different milestones of the same disease.
I see.
So when they tell you, you can prevent diabetes, what they mean is that you are able to use diet and exercise and medication to keep your blood glucose level below that threshold. And unfortunately, that's an ongoing thing. It's not like you do it and you can forget about it. It's either you keep on doing it or your blood sugars will rise.
I think that's where the real, I could see that could be the real danger if your focus is to prevent it. And and the person's just, well, I'm good now. Like you're saying, it's not that kind of, that mindset really, you avoid it. Like we're going through the idea of avoidance. And I see a lot. I work, I've been in churches, I've been a leader in churches, and I see this kind of, unfortunately, gets kind of pushed. We could prevent it by eating this and this and that. And I feel it's misinformation, because it's more healthier to address the problem as it is and just live your life the best you can, as opposed to just, I'm going to prevent it. Now, what if you don't prevent it? You're going to avoid the doctors. You're going to avoid going to the primary care doctor, get the help that you need just because. And then, unfortunately, that may delay. And like you said earlier, it can cause more irreparable damage when it was treatable from the first place. So.
Well, that's a mistake a lot of people make. Early on, type 2 diabetes, which, let me explain to you briefly how that even works. I think most people don't understand that. In normal digestion, your body digests food and it turns it into glucose. Glucose is a sugar that winds up in your bloodstream. It goes to every cell in your body that use it for energy. Now, when your pancreas senses the glucose in the blood, it produces a hormone called insulin. Insulin gets released into the blood and it travels along with the glucose. The insulin acts as a key that opens the cell walls to allow the glucose to go in. So when it does that, two things happen. One is that the cells get the energy they need, but the other is that the glucose leaves the bloodstream. So your blood glucose level goes down to normal. So this is a constant fluctuating thing that happens, and it's an amazing thing that it goes on. It's a wonderful thing. Now, with type 2 diabetes, which about 95% of diabetics have type 2, they get a condition called insulin resistance. And it is exactly what the name suggests. It makes your cells resistant to insulin, which means that your pancreas has to make more and more insulin to get the cell walls to open to let the glucose in. It gets worse over time. And because of that, the pancreas is overworked, and eventually the cells that produce insulin die. So by the time you're diagnosed with prediabetes, you've already lost about half of your body's capacity to produce insulin. Now, that's not going to change. The insulin's resistance won't go away, and your pancreas won't rebuild its capacity either. And that's when the diet and exercise and medication get critical. You can help control your blood sugars by limiting the amount of glucose you put into your body, but also by exercising, you allow your body to burn it off or to store it. Your muscles actually store glucose. So between the two of those things, you can control your blood glucose level. But there are things you have to actively do. You have to be aware that you need to do them and that you need to do them.
Yeah. And it's I guess the concern is there's this quick fix mentality when you're like, okay, I'm getting close to pre-diabetes. I went to the doctor. Let me do everything I heard someone say, either in the church setting or my family setting, and then I'll be fine. And I'll avoid the doctors. And what I don't know is what I don't know.
Yeah, well, the problem is what you don't know is you're going to be really sick in a few years. What you don't know.
I guess that's the thing. Like there's a problem that is, and it's sad because it's a problem that can be addressed, but the sheer fact that we don't address it makes it a bigger problem. So,
and another thing about the information that's out there is that there's a huge amount of information. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong. A lot of it is misleading. You go on the web and you see the 5 foods you must eat to help control diabetes. The 5 foods you must avoid, to avoid diabetes. It's all misleading stuff. What I tell people is just to take a look at what you're actually eating. It doesn't matter what they say about the 1,000 foods are on the web. It's what you're actually eating. And if you look at your own diet, your breakfast stay pretty much the same. Lunches are around about the same every day. Dinners will change up more often, but over the course of a month, you're probably eating the same recipes. So the universe of foods that we as individuals have to look at is really not that great, especially when you consider for breakfast, probably having toast, or an egg or something like that. I mean, it's just not that many foods. So the trick is to look at the food you're eating and ask yourself, where is the sugar?
I see.
And once you identify where the sugar is coming from, then you can reduce those foods and increase the foods that aren't going to raise your blood sugar. And by the way, here's a point that people should know. Carbohydrates consist of 2 basic kinds. One is sugars and the other is starches. Starches aren't sugars, but they get digested into sugar. In fact, when you eat a piece of bread, for example, 1 gram of that bread will digest into 1 gram of sugar. So it's the same thing. You can't look at bread and say, well, it doesn't say sugar on the label. If it says carbohydrate, that's what you're eating. That will raise your blood sugar. So you have to educate yourself and identify those foods and change your diet some.
Let me ask, since we're talking about diabetes, I would just want to shift gears to just to you, actually. A lot of times I get guests. I just want to give you a moment to kind of, the floor is yours to share why this passion for diabetes. A little bit, what you feel comfortable sharing to those who are listening, and why are you on this mission to share and let people know the truth about diabetes, and anything else you want to share. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, let me see if I can fit this in real quick. I was in Chicago during the week when Ron Santo was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Turned out he had type 1 diabetes back in the 1960s. And he kept it a secret because he was afraid the Cubs would fire him if they found out. So just to back up a little bit, I got to talk about low blood sugar. We all know high blood sugars are what cause long-term damage, but low blood sugars can happen to people who take insulin or take certain type 2 medications. When there isn't enough glucose in the blood, the brain starts to malfunction because the brain takes glucose directly out of the blood. Well, Santo's in a game, last of the ninth, Cubs are down by 2, there's 2 outs, and Santo's in the on-deck circle, and he feels the symptoms of low blood sugar coming on. Now, if that gets low enough, your eyesight gets bad, you can see double or triple. If it gets low enough, you can pass out. Luckily, it's easy to fix. All you have to do is eat something sugary, and when the blood sugar level gets back up, you're okay. But Santo's in the on-deck circle, so he can't go back to the dugout and tell the manager he needs a candy bar. So he's in there, and he's just praying that the guy at the plate will make an out to retire at the side. Well, the guy walked instead, so now his bases loaded. 2 down, 2 outs, last of the ninth. Santo walks up to the plate. Robert, he said he looked up and he saw everything in triple. There were 3 pitchers, 3 scoreboards, 30 some odd people standing out in the field. And when the pitcher threw the ball, it looked like it had a slinky attached to the back of it. So he took a cut at it, connected, and put it out of the park for a walk-off grand slam home run. He made it around the bases and got back to the dugout in time to eat his candy bar. Now, the walk-off grand slam home run, that's a great story. But the real story is what was going on in Santo's head when he was running around those bases. He could have passed out in front of 20,000 fans, and then his secret would have been out. So that's an amazing story. When I got back home and started telling it, I realized, number one, that people don't understand diabetes well at all. But I was asked about type 2. And when I looked into it, it turned out that things I believed about type 2 were dead wrong. And I realized that our society has a serious problem with misinformation and misperceptions about diabetes and diabetics. That's what triggered me to do what I'm doing now. So my mission in retirement is to try to educate everybody so that diabetics don't get blamed for getting a disease that they had no role in starting. They didn't ask for the genes, they didn't ask for the triggers, but they got it. So, diabetics often walk around feeling guilty about it because even they thought they got it because they were a little overweight. Yeah. It's just not true.
Yeah. And, this reminds me I had a guest years ago. He was a Vietnam vet, and he said sometimes life is playing a bad hand well. And a lot of times, I feel with diabetes, a lot of times we think about, obviously, I work in the mental health field, so I'm thinking mental health, but in diabetes, it has a lot of bad connotations. If you have diabetes, that means you did it to yourself, and you deserve what you're getting. I feel that negative influence actually propagates this idea of fixing it quickly and avoiding stuff that could help you.
See, that you are absolutely right, and that's why I'm doing this. I do a lot of podcasts. And generally, the hosts are like you. You don't know anything about diabetes. And what I tell you, you really are surprised by. To talk about weight, for example, the National Institutes of Health tells us that 70% of us are overweight, but only about 10% of us have diabetes. On top of that, there are a lot of thin people who watch what they eat who get diabetes.
Yeah.
The reason is that weight is not the factor. It's the genetic component that is the problem. But people, when I tell people that, they say, you're right. I know a thin guy who's got diabetes, and I know lots of overweight people who don't. So how does that all add up?
Yeah.
I used to give my courses in person before COVID,
Mm.
and I met a lot of diabetics doing that. And one of the most gratifying things that would happen is that a diabetic would come to me after the class and he would say, "The best thing you told me is that I didn't cause this." You
Mm.
can see the guilt and shame drip off their faces because
Oh,
they've
yeah.
been spending all those years blaming themselves for
Mhm.
something they just did not cause.
Mhm.
So that kind of thing has to change because with so many cases of diabetes coming up,
Mm.
we need to respect people who fight it and
Mm.
encourage people who don't fight it to take it seriously. But you
Mhm.
can't encourage people to fight it if they think they're going to be shamed the minute they admit they have it.
Yeah, it's I totally agree. If one thing gets lost, I a lot of times say in mental health is dignity, but I feel the same way with diabetes. You have diabetes, it's it's always classed as if you have type 2 diabetes, you did it yourself.
Yep.
Type 1, there's a little bit more empathy, but they don't really take the time to understand it or care about it
Yep.
at that time. And for me, it's not the like these problems are things that there are treatments. There's other diseases that are not treatments yet. There's a lot of things that are still not able to really see, but but when it comes to diabetes, there is a treatment. But the sad truth of it, as we talk about during National Wellness Month, there's so many people with diabetes, and I guess the approach doesn't work when you shame them, when you make them feel like they're less than just because they have diabetes. And I feel that is the problem in essence, because if you don't get the help, if you don't feel you can, because you'll just be called, oh, because you're overweight. Maybe you're overweight all your life. Maybe your whole life you've been a child. You've been overweight. I know for one, I'm half Korean, half Puerto Rican. And it's kind of confusing. So the one thing,
How in the world does that happen?
that comes from the military.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I get it.
So what I want to say about that is, like, I noticed I have allergies now that I didn't have before. Like now I can't drink a lot of things, like milk wise, anything that my mom in Korea, cheese, anything like that. It's very not good for me. Well, I have allergies in that, or that I didn't have in my 20s or 30s. I'm 40 now, and I have them. Yeah, so if those little minute changes happen, I didn't like overconsume milk. I didn't overconsume cheese. I just ate it like everyone else. I sometimes, if you give yourself the time, and I ask this question, am I allowed to get better? I say this to mental health. I say this to people with diabetes. Are you allowed to get better? Are you allowed to feel more, have a fuller life? I have family members who have diabetes. I know that I'm at risk with diabetes. If I do show signs, I'll take the steps to get myself the health, take the steps so I can stay healthy longer and live longer and more prosperous. So I appreciate what you're doing. Let's say that.
Well, if we can give people the right attitudes, there'll be a much greater chance of their staying well.
Yeah.
And you can't. There are people who have lived for 80 years with diabetes, and they do fine, but they're really attentive.
There's a couple quotes I want to share. One's from Dr. Kenneth Cooper. He says, "We do not stop exercising because we grow old. We grow old because we stop exercising." It's kind of, that's... and there's another one that I found was anonymous, but I like what it says. It says, "I am bent but not broken. I'm scarred but not disfigured. I'm sad but not hopeless. I'm tired but not powerless. I'm angry but not bitter. I'm depressed but not give up." That it's understanding that, I say this, and I know it's different, but I do feel there's some parallels. The elephant in the room whenever I'm working with someone in mental health is it sucks. I'll just say this: it's not like let's not go around the lawn. It's inconvenient. Diabetes is inconvenient, and now if we're gonna say it's not, I distrust that. I like to work the problem. I don't like to give false information. I like to be there present and help them the way I can. I think John Green says it best. It says there's hope even when the brain tells you there isn't. And I feel sometimes when you're around people who say, "You did this to you, okay, let's just play with that mindset. I did this to me. How does that help me? How does that help my diabetes? You're telling me that I did this to me. You're telling me that, oh, I should have eaten this." Well, at the end of the day, I'm living my body. You're not, and I feel unfortunately, it's pervasive in some churches that don't really know a lot that will just kind of feed this because, and I don't feel it's very helpful, and I feel it's more damaging, honestly, from my perspective.
Well, it is. There's no point in shaming people. There just isn't. What good can possibly come of that? Especially when it's not justified. And that's the point I'm making. It's not justified. You mentioned your church. I created a couple of videos that are cheap. I'm only charging because I have expenses, but they're cheap. And my dream is that people will buy them and show them to groups like churches or civic groups or whatever, because what I found is that it replicates what I was doing before COVID, where I was doing group presentations. Some of the best things about it weren't what I presented. It was the interactions of people afterwards, where they talked about personal experiences, whether they have diabetes or they have a spouse who has it or whatever it may be. Those discussions are what are really powerful. There are two videos, they're both under a half hour long, and that's deliberate because I want people to watch it for the first half hour, but if you have a 1 hour meeting, you can spend the second half hour talking about it. Yeah. So it can really be a powerful thing. So
I just want to, and I want to share, not to interject, but for those who are listening, watching, all the links to find out more about those videos will be in the notes. So I do encourage you to check them out and see if they'll be helpful for the groups you're in. If you are in a civic group or just a group that you attend, and it may be something that of interest, I do encourage you to check it out and see if that might be a fit for you guys. So I just want to interject. So it'll be for those who are listening. So
well, they will be helpful. I used to, again, before COVID, I spoke to a lot of groups outside. There was one Rotary group that I spoke to outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And the president of the group, after the presentation, she said, "Did you notice that nobody talks?" She said, "There's one table over there. They're always talking. They never shut up." He said, "But for you, they clammed up and listened." She was amazed. But Robert, that's the kind of reception I always got, because people don't know much about diabetes, and they know that they don't know much about it, and they're eager to find out what's really going on with it. So whether it's a church group or anybody else, most people are in that boat. They just don't know.
And in this regard, finding out what is really out there, what is true, and just grabbing back your health, not letting it be something that is, temporarily to put aside because you just feel so much burden, so much shame because you feel that you're the cause, and at the same time, just playing with that thought process. I feel that breaking through those barriers is what I feel is very important, and making sure that you have access to the care and the knowledge and how to take care of yourself. I just want to commend you for what you're doing. A lot of times diabetes is kind of looked over. It's like, oh, diabetes, next. But I do feel it's important.
Well, you've hit on another point there. It is common. It's very common. But just because it's common doesn't mean it's not serious. Diabetes is the 7th leading killer in the United States. So people are literally dying from it. Lots of people are. So just because it's common doesn't mean it's not serious.
Exactly. And I feel like I tell people, personalize your care. Don't personalize what happens outside of you, because a lot of times, if you're gonna compare with other people, you're just overgeneralizing. If you have diabetes, get the care that's right for you,
right?
Whatever that is. So, I want to ask you as we wrap up. Finding our healing is our theme of the month. What do you think is important when you think about national wellness? What do you want to say to those listening? What do you think should be remembered when we pay tribute to national wellness? We're talking about diabetes, and that's appropriate. So anything you want to share to add as we wrap up?
My purpose is to educate society. I'm trying to create a society that's informed, that will respect diabetics who fight the disease, and encourage those who don't to take it seriously. If guys like you, who now you know more about diabetes than you did a half an hour ago, if people like you can learn just that much and be encouraging to people, that will make a tremendous difference. But it's got to be a lot of us. We just have to educate society in general. And that's, to me, that's a critical thing. What I tell people is that we know how to treat diabetes. That's why I'm here 43 years later. We know how to treat it.
Yeah.
But the problem isn't medical. It's social.
Yeah.
We have to have people on the street in our communities understand what's going on and be encouraging to diabetics rather than critical.
I was thinking about this African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, and I feel a lot of society wants to go fast, you could go fast alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think if we have this coalescence that we're thinking together, we're treating each other better, whatever disease or ailments you have. And now today we're talking about diabetes. Be kind. Honestly, it is disrespectful to just judge someone because they're having a problem, an illness that you don't understand. So have the common decency that, if you were struggling with a disease, how would you want to feel? How would you want to be supported? I extend it to the communities, be it church communities, religious communities of all sorts, whatever community you're in. I encourage you to be kinder to those who are struggling. Don't make it out to be a value thing of their own personal, who they are. They are not the disease, or not diabetes. I say this too a lot of times with mental health, so it does kind of parallel. You are not depression. You are not whatever they say. You're a person who is having a rough patch. Let's try to work through it. And I appreciate you. And Al, any last final thoughts? If we can say final thoughts. Any last things you want to say as we wrap up?
Well, just thanks for having me on. I appreciate having the forum. I hope people do go to my website and take a look at those videos. Like I said, I forget what I'm charging. Like, you can rent them for $1.99. You can buy them for $4.99. It's not going to break anybody's bank. Yeah. Especially if it's your church and you got 20 people in a group. Divide that by 20. It's
Well, you can't put a dollar amount when it comes to health. So I do encourage those who feel it's going to be appropriate and something that'll be helpful. I know will be. Check out the website. It'll be in the notes. Thank you again, Chet, for coming on, sharing your thoughts and insight. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries through the various platforms. ReviveMinistryFL.com is the website. Leaving with his last quote, it says, if you want something you never had, you must be willing to do something you never done.